This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. Today on the podcast, I have Carl Richards of Behavior Gap fame from the New York Times, behaviorgap.com. Awesome sketches. I'm sure I have posted these. I know I've posted these on my blog and probably tweeted them and you name it. But I love his sketches. Good conversation. I hope you enjoy. So, I must say, I've been a big fan of the sketches for a while, and I keep thinking of my first experience in London with Mind the Gap. And,
oh, yeah. Yeah, that's funny.
But listen, seriously, I think what's so cool, and I'm really curious, to how you first came across the idea with the sketches. I've heard some of your background, but, to take the sketches, which bring good investing and behavioral economics together in an understandable, digestible format, it's pretty rare. Because I think it gets, I don't see that kind of synthesis in a regular anywhere, really.
It's funny. I just hired a radio producer to help me start this project called Behavior Gap Radio, and I always thought, because of what little background I have on the written sort of journalist side, that pre-interviews were awesome. Like you call and you have. So I did that with my the first episode of Behavior Gap Radio. We had this pre-interview that was like 60 minutes long. It's just because we went off, like we had so much fun talking, and my producer was like, you know what, you really shouldn't do much pre-interview. I told her, I was like, the pre-interview was so great. It was the same. She's like, you know what? You're never going to get those stories back. Like, you think you can say, hey, tell me about this. But if you miss so much. So anyway, I learned something and it was true. When I called, those same stories didn't come up and the energy wasn't the same because, the first conversation is always the first conversation. So anyway, to answer your question, I don't really know, right? Like, I didn't have a grand. The images were born out of a pragmatic need, like a real, almost like act of desperation, because my job, and I took it pretty seriously, was to help people make smart decisions about money, and particularly to avoid really bad ones. And in doing that job, I would be sitting across the table from somebody and they would be looking at me with a blank stare. Like and I thought I was pretty good at making things, understandable. But these concepts are so abstract, like risk, and it's all intangible, like you can't really put your arms around any of it, that, even the most intelligent people in other fields, they've been successful, they've made plenty of money, they're incredibly smart. You just don't understand. So anyway, they were just staring at me with these blank stares, and I remember just grabbing a piece of paper, like, no, let me just show you like this, right? And using the whiteboard in the conference room where I worked. And I noticed things change. So I didn't really have any grand, like, I think I'll take the art of making things simple and apply it to, it was just purely this pragmatic need to get a point across, and it just sort of grew from there.
Okay, let me, I've got like two screens in front of me. One of the screens is just filled with sketches, and people will know who you are as I give an introduction before we start talking, but I'm looking at one of my favorites, and I think I definitely have used this in a PowerPoint presentation, and don't worry, they always saw the behaviorgap.com in the bottom, so I was always giving you props. But I love the outliers matter. And it's such a tough concept. Here's this curve, and heck, I don't even know what percentage of the population know it's a bell curve. But I think they could start to grasp really quickly, one side of that might not be good. One side of that could be good, but it depends on how you get to the good. But just the sheer fact that they matter. Just love that in a simple sketch.
Yeah, I that was probably, I would imagine that was sometime in 2009. And I just remember thinking, in the short term, right, like on a daily or monthly basis, returns aren't normally distributed along a bell curve, right? You have these big, in fact, you have these outliers. It's a little, somebody explained it to me once that, imagine you filled a football stadium with people, right? There's 100,000 people there, and you took the average net worth or the average income. Average net worth is probably a little better. Average net worth of somebody you took the average net worth of the 100,000 people there. Well, and imagine also you took the average height. Well, we probably already know what the average height was. Among the U.S. male population, it was probably, whatever it is, 5'10" or 5'11", 5'10", I think it is. We probably already know, and we probably have some idea of the average weight, because those are pretty normally distributed. But when you go to average net worth, let's just say that Bill Gates was there or Warren Buffett was there, that you have, sometimes the outliers are so far out that they actually obscure the meaning of the average. Right? The average is almost meaningless because there's this one or two or three single outliers. And with height and weight, sort of natural physical phenomenon, you don't get that. I mean, you don't really run into anybody that's 12 feet tall. And so over the long period of time, maybe even, annual or 5-year periods, returns do tend to be normally distributed. The dilemma I had in 2009, which I think is just important for people to remember, is we don't live in 5-year periods. We live daily. And so, if you're paying attention to the market every day, which you probably shouldn't, but if you were, or you happen to not be able to avoid it because it's everywhere, your experience didn't look like a normal bell curve. It looked more like, wow, really sort of abnormally distributed. So there was these big outliers. And I just remember thinking, man, those really matter. Like we always say, in the industry is pretty famous for saying they matter. Outliers, they all work into the average. And over the long term, they actually do. Over 5-year periods and 10-year periods, they do work into the average. But because we don't live, I don't know anybody who opens their statement. I don't know anybody who gets 5-year statements, right? They get monthly statements. And so I just thought it was important. I don't think it necessarily changes the way we behave per se. It's just that we need to be aware that risk on a daily and weekly and monthly basis is real. It hurts. You feel it. It's pretty hard to get away from unless you live, somewhere where you should, you live somewhere where you just don't hear about it. So that's what that sketch was about.
So radical self-awareness. Another phrase that I've seen come from you. I like that. How would you describe to the audience the concept of radical self-awareness? Because radical is a tough word. I mean, that's a kind of grab you by the cojones, kind of says, hey, you better pay attention if this is radical.
Yeah, this to me was, and I actually believe this is my next sort of 5 to 10 years of work is this idea of how kind of mindfulness and maybe a less new age word would be awareness applies to our financial decisions. Because I think I first remember sort of learning about this general concept from Jim Collins, who wrote Good to Great and whatever the other ones are, which are all awesome. I don't mean to downplay them. They're all awesome. I just can't remember right now. The
catalytic mechanism. I still love that.
Yeah, so Good to Great and Better to Best, or How the Best Survive or Built to Last. Anyway, he had a video once, I remember, that he referred to this little experiment he did where he carried around a little notebook. And on the front of the notebook was written, the bug, as in like little insect, the bug called Jim. That was the front of the notebook. And he said it was an experiment. He was just watching this bug called Jim. And it was him, right? Like he just said, look, that's the cool. It's one of the neat things about being human is you can do that, right? We have the ability to sort of, right now, I can kind of project myself up to the corner of my room and look down on me having this discussion with me. We have the ability to sort of watch ourselves And so Jim would just carry on this notebook and he'd say, oh, I noticed I just got mad about this, right? I noticed I just did this. I noticed this. And he said, this idea of just being aware of what's going on. And I think, I really believe that most of personal finance and most of the investment problems but most of the personal finance literature and particularly the media and all the books, including mine, are written at the level of, they're written at the level of habit. And we're sort of just hacking at the branches, like, oh, don't buy that latte, track your expenditures, whatever. Don't use credit cards, use cash. We're hacking at sort of these these habits where I'm really curious about way underneath there. Before habit, there was action, and before action, there was feeling, and before feeling, there was thought. And that was sort of the radical self-awareness, was the idea of like, can I pay attention to what I'm thinking and feeling about this? Like when I walk into the store, if spending's a problem of mine, like if I walk into the store or the Apple store and I walk out with a new iPad, and I had planned on that, and I get home and I'm bummed because, wow, I just blew the budget. I've got to explain it to my wife and whatever. I mean, that's a habit. At the very least, it's an action. But what was it when I walked into the store that I was, can I pay attention? Oh, that's interesting. I'm feeling like doing something I know I don't really, why am I feeling that way? Ah, interesting. Like just the bug called Carl was sort of the idea. That's radical self-awareness. Sorry, that's a little bit deep for this early in the morning.
Well, let's see, where am I? I'm at like 10 o'clock at night. So, that's
a good point. Where are you?
I'm in Vietnam.
Oh, wow. Very cool. Where are most of the people who listen to this? Where do they live?
Oh, I'd say probably majority based on traffic, 50% US at least.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm only a transplant in the last let's say 2 years. So
I was there last summer
in Vietnam.
Yeah, at a speaking. Somebody had me come speak at an event in Ho Chi Minh City.
Yeah, that's where I am.
And we cruised around and went to the tunnels, and I mean, it was an amazing experience. I took my 14-year-old daughter, and we were just blown away. I cannot believe the scooter situation. It's unbelievable.
It's organized chaos. There's no road rage. It just kind of works. I don't know how it works.
Blown away.
I don't know how it works.
And I got warned. People said, okay, when you get there and you need to cross the street, there's going to be no stoplights, and there's going to be a bazillion scooters, literally like a river of scooters. Just hold your daughter's hand and walk. Don't stop. Don't slow down. Don't speed up. Don't change direction. And I was like, when we got there, I was like, I was like, oh yeah, that's cool. That'll be fun. When I got there, there's no way. But we did it. We just closed our eyes and walked. It was amazing.
I still remember when I first got here last year, this gal I went out on a date with, she grabbed my hand. She was in high heels. She just grabbed my hand and walked straight out. We must have walked 200 meters straight through this, this kind of I don't know, I want to say glorieta, the Spanish term for the traffic circle. And we walked straight like 200 meters. There's taxis, everything. And I'm just like, she's just laughing at me.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah,
crazy.
Okay, so the other chart, the one that I'm looking at right now, just to kind of change the subject, Vietnam's a fun conversation. We can go there for a lot, but
sure.
Effectiveness going up the left side, along the bottom is simplicity. Imagine a line going from left to right. And as things get more simple, they get more effective. And as they get more complicated, the effectiveness goes down. Now, I think regardless of how somebody might try to tackle proper investing, or depending on how they want to define it, what kind of strategy, et cetera, I think simplicity never goes out of fashion in terms of its effectiveness.
Yeah, I don't, it's just funny. We all say that, and we sort of, most people believe it. And then the dilemma, of course, is when we're presented with a simple solution, we normally dismiss it as, that can't work. Like and it happens uniformly. Like I had an interesting experience with a good friend of mine's, an emergency room doctor. And he was telling me that sometimes when, people come in and, they're convinced they're dying, right? Like this is this big thing. And he sits down, does all the tests and the diagnosis, and the prescription essentially is here, take a couple ibuprofen, take a couple aspirin and go home and get some rest. And he said, instead of what you would think, like, oh, wow, great, relieved, like I'm not dying. That's great. This is so easy. I'll just take this ibuprofen, which I can, buy at the corner drugstore, and then I'll get some rest. That's what the doctor said to do. He said there's often a sense of disappointment. Like, what? Like something more complicated's not wrong with me? Like, and it's so true. Like with almost all of our issue, eating, health, whatever. And it's particularly when it comes to money, like this is really simple, not to be confused with easy, but really simple. You buy good things, you hold on to them for a long, long time. And you spend a little bit less than you make, at least, right? So this is all really simple, but so we all sort of pay lip service to this idea. Yeah. I love simple solutions. I just want my life to be simpler. I don't know of anything I hear more often than people like, oh, life is just so complex. I just want it to be simple. Is there just a simple solution? You hear that all the time, but then when it's presented to us, we sort of trick ourselves into believing, oh, that can't be any good. It's got to be more complicated than that.
Let me ask I don't know if I call this a difficult question, but as you're in the financial planning business and you've got a megaphone, a lot of people are paying attention. I'm paying attention. I love your sketches. When I look at, and in my world, I've written books about a certain style of quantitative strategy, which is different than I'm sure that you talk to clients about on a regular basis. But when you do talk to clients about the strategies that you do bring up with them, how has your thinking adjusted in watching market movement in the since 2008, and especially the government involvement in markets? How has that made you feel as a planner, somebody who's helping clients, when it seems like the magic hand, so to speak, is so involved in markets in such unprecedented ways? It's got to make it even harder to give good advice to people, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting dilemma. I mean, it to a large. So here's the way I like
giving the easy questions.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question. The way I think about that stuff is, the markets have sort of always worked these things out, right? We've had periods of excess in just about anything sort of you want to name. We can go back. Now, of course, it's different. It's just different enough. It's just different enough to trick us into thinking it's completely different and it will never be the same, right? Like, you could certainly argue that we've never seen this sort of quantitative easing, to use a term that I've really grown to despise, but we've never seen this sort of rush or flood of liquidity. We've never seen these sorts of problems, but we've seen problems before. And so I just, and this is hard. I mean, this is the hard part about investing, and it's the hard part about giving advice, I think, is we don't know exactly how this is going to turn out, but we know that things have always worked out before. And so to be an optimist and assume that things, now, not to be a blind optimist, although I don't know that there's anything wrong with that either, to be honest, just because it's an awfully good way to live life. But to at least be a rational optimist has been how history has worked the last, 100 plus years. And so I can either look back at the weighty evidence of history and say, the market going, the concept of capitalism, therefore sort of the market over time going up, has been a permanent trend. I mean, that's what's gone on the last 100 plus years. And these declines are temporary, insanely painful, but temporary. I can look at that and I can say that's either going to continue, or I can say we're in uncharted territory and I have no idea what's going to go on. And so I have these two choices. Can either rely on the weighty evidence of history and of course be prudent and smart and all that stuff. I think what I learned from 2008, 2009 was risk is real, right? That it's not just like, buy the dips, this is fun. Like risk it's a real thing, and it hurts a lot. Now, of course, the markets have come back plus some since then, but that doesn't change the fact that really hurt. I mean, risk became, and I've been in the business 15, 16, 17 years now. And so I've lived through, other things that we would call, scary markets, September 11th, Y2K, all of that stuff, but nothing really prepared you for 08, 09 in terms of just the sheer fear that most of us felt. And that's a real thing. And that has fundamentally changed the way I view risk. And I don't gotten into this debate with a lot of people about, oh no, that's not risk tolerance. That's your risk perception. I don't care what you call it. All I know is I invest completely. I am a more conservative person with my money than I was then, period. And that event was one of the reasons. So I think long-winded answer to your question is just, I think it is tough. It's tough dealing with uncertainty, but that's why the equity premium, in my opinion, the equity premium is there because it's tough dealing with uncertainty.
You might slam me back on this. One of the things that I've given in some speeches in the last couple of years is not necessarily to say it's bad for the population as a whole, but to make the argument, do the Japanese people believe in index investing and buy and hold? Is it because I think part of, and obviously there's no way you can really argue with what you just described. Typically it's, there's been some big down periods, but it just keeps going up. We're just talking equities. But when you look at a nation like Japan, they've clearly, psyche-wise, have got to be feeling a lot different than America because they've not yet. And, you could lose half a lifetime in the way their stocks have been down. So it is tricky. It is tricky and difficult topics.
No, I agree. And there's right? That's the part that is called risk. And yeah, you're absolutely right. And some of my more conservative friends that are okay talking about it, that are passive sort of index investors, will say 40-year periods are what you should be thinking, right? There could be a 40-year period where this equity premium does not show up. Now that's not how the normal person thinks. Maybe we'll go through a tough 3 to 5 year period. 10 years would be really on the outside. But, there are, and again, I think a part of that has become being clear about being broadly diversified outside of your own country. We sort of take a country, we try to match world market caps, right? With the U.S. making up whatever the number is it over 50 now, 56 or 46, somewhere around 50%. That means you shouldn't have 90% of your money in the U.S., right? If you're in South Africa and South Africa makes up 1% of the world market cap, having 100% of your money invested in South Africa, they have some pretty serious regulatory requirements, so they can't have 99% of their money invested outside of South Africa. I know that, but having 100% of your money in South Africa exposes you to a different set of risks than if you didn't have 100% of your money there. Does that make sense?
Yeah. As you bring that up, why don't you go into some of your thinking for one of your sketches that I also love, which is your diversification sketch.
And I think there's 2 or 3. Which one are you looking at? Well, I'm looking at
the square, circle, triangle, asterisk.
Oh, yeah.
That's just great. It makes people think.
Yeah, that was a fun one just because it's actually one of my favorite ones. It's just so, to describe it, it shouldn't be a surprise. It's insanely simple. I have no artistic, skill. So it's literally just a square. And then right next to the square is a circle. They're all sort of lined up horizontally, a square, and then right next to the square is a circle, I think. And then right next to that's a triangle, and then right next to that's an asterisk. So it's just 4 different shapes, and underneath it it's labeled diversification. And the point was just look, sometimes we use that word. I know I've used that word diversification, and people are like, I don't really, I sort of conceptually, I think I understand what it means. I just don't really, I don't really understand it. And so that was an attempt just to say, here, how simple could we make diversification? You own different things that look differently, that operate differently, that act differently, that have different purposes. You blend them together in a portfolio, and then you'd be able to call it diversified. It's
very difficult for people to accept losing, i.e. risking money. But the first priority is really not to lose money. So they're two different thoughts, but I could see someone's minds maybe spinning going, hold on, you're telling me I can't accept losing, but then you're telling me the first priority is not to lose money.
Yeah, I think the one thing that we underestimate is the pain of losing money. I mean, and we forget it pretty quick. It's a genetic thing to forget pain pretty quickly. Ask any, and I'm going to say this very carefully. I mean, we have 4 kids. My wife has been pregnant and given birth 4 times, and she would tell you after the first one that she was never going to do it again, the day after, but luckily, she forgot how painful that experience was, and so it's a genetic thing for us to forget pain pretty quickly. But so you combine those two things, that we forget pain pretty quickly, and when we go through it, we really, really don't like it. Like the pain of loss, it's just called, the academic term for it is loss aversion, right? And I don't know exactly. Here, let's do a little experiment, right? Like, so the little experiment would be, if I was going to flip a coin and say, let's just say it was a, to make it really easy, it was a $1 coin. I'm going to flip a coin and I say heads, you win. If I win, you have to give me $1. If you win, I have to give you $1. Most people won't take that bet. Even though it's a 50-50 chance, most people won't take that bet. So if I say, all right, if I win, you have to give me $1. If you win, I have to give you $1.05.
Can I play that all day long?
Yeah, right. Yeah, but most people, even if you said, can I play that, wouldn't take that bet. Right? Because but the number starts to get, what they found is the number is close to $1.50, before you start to take that bet. $1.20, $1.50, somewhere in that neighborhood before you start to say, oh yeah, okay, I'll do that. Now, of course, they don't ask that question that you just asked, can I play that for infinity? But the point here is we feel loss much more acutely, almost twice as much as we enjoy gain. Yeah. And so I think one of the things we've really underestimated is that aversion we have to loss. And I think when we're honest about it and we remember and we go back and look at, our journals, or we talk to people, hey, remind me how I felt in this period or this period when I lost a lot of money. If we keep that in mind when we're making our investment decisions, I think most of us would be far more conservative. And we choose, instead of trying to take more risk, we would choose to alter our goals, have lower goals, or maybe make a little bit more money to get into the investment plan, whatever those other levers are we could pull.
I'm not much of a fundamental analyst. I don't know if I really have much to add there. It's not been my world, but I heard you mention something on an interview, and it struck me because I remember watching it at the same time in my life starting out too, which was the Netscape IPO in August of 95. And I still think to some today, I think I can make a decent case if someone gave me a stage that today we are still paying for the sins of Netscape's success, because that created that massive bubble that then popped, that then required all kinds of easing in 2003, that then created more bubbles, that then has required additional easing to this day. So if I was going to lay the blame at anybody for our crazy markets, that would be the euphoria that came from Mark Andreessen and Jim Clark making a fortune off that first .com IPO. Am I completely crazy on that line, that thinking?
No, I mean, you could maybe take that same sort of lineage all the way back to tulip bulbs and before, though. You know what I mean? Like it might be more a function of our, just crazy behavior in terms of, we tend to love to buy things when we genetically were wired to get more of things that give us pleasure and run away from things that give us pain real quickly. And I think that tendency has flown all the way through. But I think that the more direct relative of what we've lived through lately would probably be, and I've said that, the first shot across the bow what we're going through now might have been that Netscape IPO.
Yeah. Hey, listen, it was good chatting with you. I will pass along, I started my podcast January of 12, and about 217 or 18 episodes in, I've done, I think, maybe 2 or 3 pre-interviews where maybe some of the guests were nervous. They were kind of actually probably more high-profile names, but had not talked a lot recently, and they wanted to kind of do some talking in advance. And I couldn't, they were so high profile, I couldn't tell them it was a dumb idea. And it was a dumb idea. And their interviews weren't as good because we did the dang pre-interview.
Yeah, that's really true, isn't it? Because you also can't say things like, hey, when we were talking before, because then everybody listening feels like you're part of a secret club. Like, hey, you guys already had a party that we weren't even invited to. That's the other thing I learned is you couldn't really sort of, hey, when we were talking yesterday, you told me this story. Will you tell that again? That just doesn't sound good to people. So I think that's right.
Yeah, I think you've got enough of a footprint where you can probably just tell people, this is what we do. We'll just talk. It'll be fine. Don't worry. It's not live unless you're doing it live. Maybe that's a whole different.
No.
Yeah.
No, they're not live.
Okay. And you're safe.
They're live.
You're safe.
Yeah.
Okay, listen.
Well, thanks, man.
BehaviorGap.com. That's the best place, right?
Yes, it is. BehaviorGap.com for sure.
Okay. Hey, Carl. Hopefully we can talk again in the future.
Yeah. Thank you. Have a great day.
Take care. I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.